This is an RNZ podcast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for Broadcasting and Media, what announcements has he made regarding funding for world-class public media?
The Honourable Willie Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, today I've announced that we're delivering a funding boost to deliver world-class public media for all New Zealanders.
That was Labour MP Naisi Chen with a powder puff of a patsy question in Parliament for her government's Broadcasting and Media Minister Willie Jackson. But back on the 6th of April, it was a query the Minister was only too happy to answer.
Radio New Zealand will receive a 60% increase, Mr. Speaker, of $25.7 million annually. This funding will help it meet competing demands and deliver world-class public media for all of Aotearoa.
That funding boost was big for RNZ's bottom line for sure, but it was also billed as a saving by the government that same day because this was a backstop for the collapse of the government's new public media entity plan, which would have had a much bigger bill. And Newsroom's co-editor Mark Jennings, formerly a long-serving TV3 News chief, reckoned that the much-repeated world-class public media Willie Jackson spoke of there seemed an optimistic outcome if you took the government's previous words literally when he wrote this.
Until weeks ago, the future of Aotearoa New Zealand's public media organisations was looking so grim, the government was prepared to spend $370 million over 4 years to merge TVNZ and RNZ.
But while what Willie Jackson announced on April the 6th was effectively a pre-budget announcement concerning RNZ, with a one-off boost of $10 million for the broadcasting funding agency New Zealand On Air thrown in as well, Willie Jackson and Cabinet have much more on their minds. When Willie Jackson told reporters there would be a big announcement the day before the big reveal, he also told reporters he was working on a broadcasting strategy for all New Zealanders. And after the announcement back on April the 6th, he faced non-powder puff questions about that from his opposition counterpart in Parliament, Melissa Lee. And Willie Jackson's rebuttal made plain just how much needs to be done, if only legislatively, late in Labour's second term.
RNZ Charter Review, the ANZ PM Bill included a new charter designed for a modern fit for purpose national public media entity. We'll use that good work to update and strengthen our RNZ Charter. And Mr. Speaker, my officials are looking to modernise our outdated Broadcasting Act legislation that the useless National Party put in place.
And even aside from all that, there's also the matter of what now for state-owned TVNZ, which is now not only not being merged with RNZ, but is also looking for a new chief executive to replace the current one who's leaving in June. And several new board members are needed urgently also to oversee whatever the new direction is, if any. Because the minister has hinted it won't be highly commercial business as usual for TVNZ. On the day he announced the new funding for RNZ, RNZ's midday news host Charlotte Cook asked Willie Jackson if TVNZ's future has been aired by the Cabinet.
We're exploring ways TVNZ can play a more active public broadcaster role, and we might be able to do this in terms of their charter, maybe looking at a charter or in strengthening and monitoring their reporting requirements. So you know, for us, you know, they're a very, very important part of the jigsaw puzzle or the ecosystems.
The previous TVNZ charter was introduced by a Labour-led government in 2002 and then scrapped by an incoming National-led government less than 10 years later. Now, some commentators have claimed recently that the current minister is now pursuing the goals of the public media merger by other means, like leaning on TVNZ. And in what was Mediawatch's first opportunity to talk to the minister since the big announcement earlier this month, Hayden Donnell asked Willie Jackson about that. But first, what does Willie Jackson and what should RNZ's audience expect from the RNZ funding boost he announced recently? And would that actually include a new digital platform, as the official announcement seemed to suggest?
Kia ora, Minister Jackson. Welcome to Mediawatch.
Kia ora. Good to have a bit of a kōrero with you today.
So the $25 million funding announcement for RNZ included $12 million for a new digital platform. So do you actually expect RNZ to create an entirely new brand or service there?
Not at all. I think there was some crosswire with my officials there that shouldn't have actually gone out that way. I know that I've spoken with RNZ and my officials have spoken with them, and what I do expect is that they will work on the existing service. And the other side of it, it's really up to RNZ. It's not for us to say what has to happen. RNZ is independent from government and will make its own operational decisions. But I would imagine that they will work on what's going to happen in terms of the current digital infrastructure and upgrade things in terms of the websites, in terms of the apps. And I'm looking forward to see what RNZ comes up with.
In February 2020, we did propose this new youth service, and Dr. Jim Mather said, this youth service would explore civic and financial, lifestyle and well-being issues for youth. I wonder whether some of that $25 million will go towards a youth service.
Again, it's up to RNZ. It's not for me to tell them where it should go. But, in our general kōrero, we've talked about youth, we've talked about Māori, we've talked about Pacifica, underserved audiences. And I think that extra 12 million will really help National Radio RNZ to find those audiences again, our regional audiences. National Radio has been hampered and restricted in terms of, getting to those audiences. In my kōrero with the RNZ, they actually haven't talked about a new digital website. They talked about upgrading things and building on what was already there.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're not saying you must build a new youth service, but you are hoping that RNZ, with the new money, will be reaching out to some of those underserved audiences, so like young people.
Absolutely. But it's, again, not for me to tell RNZ what to do. I think it's no secret that, I have talked with them about young people. I've talked to them about Māori. I've talked to them about Pacifica. I've talked to them about the regions. And this will help. And RNZ has told me they want to develop a new audience experiences by delivering more news and content.
Yeah, so you're mentioning that you've talked a bit to RNZ ahead of this funding announcement. Did they actually, or RNZ, provide a budget or a wish list of sorts for the additional funding?
They've been very clear how limited and how restrictive the funding has been. So I haven't spoken with them all the time, but my officials have come back to me with what their wants were. Did they give some numbers to officials? Well, they worked through that. All I knew is that if we really wanted to make an impact, we had to make and give a significant fund across to Radio New Zealand. I think in the end, a 60% boost was probably even a surprise to maybe people like yourself.
Can we talk about some underserved communities? Can we talk about Māori and Pacifica communities? Because what additional Māori and Pacifica content do you actually hope for out of the new funding?
Again, it's going to be very much up to RNZ, but obviously I would like to see more Māori and Pacifica programming and news. That's something that has been acknowledged from National Radio. On top of that, we've got an extra 10 million built in with New Zealand On Air, who are tasked with also, finding those audiences in terms of Māori and Pacifica. And the other side of it is, I do have a Māori media strategy that I've overseen, and we gave 40 million to that strategy. So, if we can complement what we're doing in a Māori sense, what we're doing in a Pacifica sense, I think that'll be, for communities, I think it'll be great for RNZ. I have been, you know my background. I came from the Māori broadcasting area. In earlier years, I have been a critic of National Radio in terms of how they've addressed.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
No problem.
Back when you were a commentator, not a politician, you said that you're more likely to hear a bird than a Māori on RNZ. And things have changed a little bit since then, but there's still no Māori presenter on any of this station's 5 top shows. We've just lost Māori Dunlop, a really prominent Māori broadcaster. Do you think that RNZ is still too reluctant to put Māori in these front-rank presenting roles?
I think RNZ is trying. That's all I ask is for RNZ to try. I don't resolve from that. I don't regret anything I did before because I just want that to lead to meaningful change. And after all that criticism, I signed an MOU with RNZ when I was involved in broadcasting before, and I've seen some of the changes. People are speaking Māori on RNZ, which is terrific. I know for a fact there's been serious approaches to different Māori broadcasters. Some of those broadcasters, for some unknown reason, haven't taken up the opportunity. So I would only ask that a major effort be made by RNZ. I'm comfortable with that. Some people could say, well, you're a bit hypocritical now. You're the minister. You've got a different view. Yes, you criticise, but are you prepared to get your hands dirty and work with roll your sleeves up and work with organisations? And I'm happy to advance RNZ's agenda, because I can see the effort going in. We don't have Māori in those prime time positions, but I don't think it's because of a lack of effort from Radio New Zealand management in terms of trying to find the right people.
Now, whatever effort has gone in, though, I mean, you told Newsroom recently, it is vital that all New Zealanders are seeing and hearing themselves in our public media. Now, when you look at RNZ's roster, its lineup of programs, is everybody hearing and seeing themselves in our public media currently? Particularly, are they hearing and seeing themselves on RNZ?
Even your senior management would probably admit there's some way to go. We need more Māori voices, and I'm pleased with the effort. But, people still making big contributions to RNZ. You've got Julian Wilcox there. Māori, sadly, has just left, but it's a long process, and I'm looking forward to more Māori voices coming through over the next couple of years. I know that your CEO is making an effort, and I hope that effort continues.
I saw Mihi Ngārangi Forbes. She suggested that some of the investment in RNZ might be perhaps better redistributed to some of the 21 iwi radio stations that are sometimes the only voice on offer in a crisis. Now, do you have some sympathy for that view?
That view is born from giving up on RNZ making a rollout change. In terms of the iwi stations, they've received more support and funding from me than any other, ever. They've had the biggest increases ever. I know iwi radio history backwards, having been the chair for 9 years. I was the chair of the 21 Māori stations. Most of them are sufficiently funded at the moment. They will say otherwise, but I know the needs out there and obligations. So though they will scream poverty every time, I think their needs are looked after. Have Māori been underfunded?
Do you really think, though, that RNZ is going to find these audiences? It doesn't have a great track record of reaching youth. It doesn't have a great track record of reaching Māori in regional areas. Do you trust it to find these audiences?
I trust that there will be an effort made. I'm sure we'll find out over the next couple of years if that's going to be the case. But the other reality that we got, and we found out during the ANZPM process, there's going to have to be a high level of collaboration. If there is no collaborative approach with iwi radio, with whakaata Māori, then you won't hit those audiences. That we have seen that in past years. I was involved in Mana Māori media in the 90s when we were doing Mana News in terms of national radio. I ran the Wātea News on national radio.
Does this clash a little bit, though, with you were saying that some of this budget doesn't really need to go to these iwi radio stations? Because I guess what you're proposing here is that RNZ really does need to collaborate with the iwi radio stations to make sure that it reaches the right audiences.
There's two sources of funding here. We have to look after our iwi radio stations in terms of our commitment to the Te Reo Māori, but also for them to flourish, they need to be given opportunities. RNZ can present those opportunities by showcasing some of the stories that is happening at iwi radio levels. It's not about, you can't just give up and say, well, you Maoris, you go and do that thing and we'll do this thing. There's got to be a time when we come together and, where there's a will, there's a way. And
moving on, is this money enough to ensure RNZ's sustainability? Because, when the merger was being sold to the public, I think Jacinda Ardern said RNZ was in danger of collapse. I remember your government said that this merger needed to happen because our current public media, it's just not going to be able to compete with the social media giants, the pace of technological change. Is just throwing $25 million at RNZ going to be enough?
I think it's enough for now. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. You're talking about a 60% funding increase here, but this is a tough world. We've got declining audiences, declining revenue. You've got competition everywhere in terms of the big digital players around the world. So I think it's enough to start off with. But, if we're able to build on this, because I see this as the first part of a broadcasting strategy that will also see me talking to TVNZ about the role they play as a public media entity. I also want to have a look at the RNZ charter, maybe put in a TVNZ charter, look at how we capitalise on the Māori media investment, looking at media content that has been jumped upon by the big companies, and we've seen small and local regional media companies getting left out and the big players not coming to the table. So I want to roll out an online news bill. And on top of that, we're looking at the Broadcasting Act. And if I can pull those other parts together, we've got a sort of comprehensive and coordinated New Zealand broadcasting strategy.
Well, there's a lot in there, but I mean, TVNZ once did have a charter. It didn't particularly go well and it was dropped. Are you looking at reintroducing one, and has that been raised with TVNZ?
We've mooted it. Obviously, the Prime Minister talked about it. I've sort of talked about it. But I think, if we're serious about a public media entity, we're going to have a look at the charter. We had a charter in terms of the Aotearoa New Zealand public media entity that we're going to look back at and see if we can incorporate some of that kaupapa, some of those initiatives, maybe in our RNZ one. Not a huge RNZ charter review, but we will review it. And then we'll see, is it possible to maybe even look at a possible TVNZ charter. These are the things I want to roll out with TVNZ people. Obviously, we're looking also at the composition of the boards, RNZ, TVNZ. My hope is that RNZ and TVNZ work closely together. That's my hope into the future, and some people think that's impossible. Well, that's what we were going to do with the merger. It would be good if we could bring TVNZ, a bit closer to what RNZ does. It's not about, obviously there's going to have to be a commercial strategy in terms of TVNZ, but it's about getting the balance and reminding them that they're an essential part of New Zealand as a public media entity. They're imperative in terms of our future, and working in tandem with RNZ would be really, really good. But it's not changing drastically what they're doing, but maybe just looking at, how they are looking at Māori, Pacific, Asian, disabled and youth audiences. How does that work in terms of their obligations? And I'm looking forward to those talks over the next few weeks.
You've mentioned to reporters in the past, you've mentioned it to me, you are preparing a broadcasting strategy for all New Zealanders. This extra RNZ funding fits within that. When can we expect just further public media policy announcements on that front?
Well, there's 5.5 months to go to the election. We'll be doing announcements over the next couple of months. We've got a budget coming up. I'm looking closely at working with Māori media at the moment. We'll have more news on our online news bill, which is important in terms of news media companies being paid fairly for their content that is used online by companies like Google and Facebook. So all those types of announcements will be made over the next probably 3 months.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Kia ora. Thank you, mate.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
That was the Broadcasting and Media Minister, Willie Jackson, talking there to Hayden Donnell on our first opportunity since the big RNZ funding boost announcement last month.